Chapter 8. Not weekly or even monthly, but every couple of months, usually on a Sunday afternoon, married couples strolled through the cottage living room. During such visits, we were encouraged to be on our best behavior with no boisterous activities. My naive thought was that they were hunting for kids. But before meeting children, couples were guided by office staff through files heavy with matron's notes. A boy would never see the assistant point him out from a distance or through a door. That's him there. A boy never knew when or how the decision was made. A formally dressed couple might simply stroll through the sitting room, smile for everyone, and stop, almost too casually, near him. They would talk in low voices, and shortly the boy would stand, look at Mrs. Corey, who nodded, and leave with the visiting couple. In less than 2 weeks, that boy had a new family and a new name. "You're working far below your potential," the principal said. I had been called into her office at Caledonia High to discuss my academic performance. "Your teachers think that if you work harder, you could go to college on a scholarship, especially in the sciences." "It'd be all right," I replied, "but I don't have time for study at home, and I have only one study period." "It's a shame," the principal said. "I understand you're in a foster home. I just wanted to tell you that you could do it if you wanted to." "Thanks," I said. Returning to classes, I was briefly elated that someone thought I could be more than a farmhand. The euphoria faded as I wondered how I could break clean from John. When I was 14, I had tried to run away from the state school. The experience left me wary of being on my own until I knew exactly where I was going. During the spring, when I was 14, I started growing restless at the state school. During recreation, I headed to a junkyard off campus, scouring the woods. Other times I would walk the tracks alone, wondering about trains, cities, and mountains, or would tromp out into the fields, watching insects or birds building nests in the bushes. Curiosity drove my pastimes. In the classroom, with my head on the desk, I often stared sideways out the window where everything looked warm and cozy. Teachers seemed to admonish me less, leaving me daydreaming at the rear of the classroom until they could stand it no longer. The teacher whispered my name near my desk. She had been walking down the aisle, which I didn't notice, handing papers back with usual comments. I sat erect, peering through hair draped over my eyes. "Peter," she repeated. "Don't you sleep at the cottage?" She laid a paper on a nearby student's desk. "The class did well on the test. How some students pass without studying is beyond me." While sliding a paper in front of me, she said, "You earned an A in spelling and English. I knew you could do it. You're just mentally lazy." Another day, the teacher caught me whispering across the aisle. "Your hand on the desk, palm up," she said, brandishing not a ruler, but a stout yardstick. I lay my hand on the desk and slowly opened my palm as she raised the yardstick high over her head. It might have been her sudden movement or the way she grunted, like being jabbed in the abdomen. Whatever it was, I jerked my hand back before she whacked it. The yardstick shattered on the desk, reduced to splinters scattered about the floor. Embarrassed, I'm certain, for exposing the viciousness of her intended punishment, like Mrs. Burt with the broken brooms, the teacher gathered the pieces and stomped back to her desk as soft laughter rippled through the classroom. This nervous energy often made me careless. Early April 1943 was unusually warm, even for south-central Minnesota. I was running barefoot through brown grass from the previous autumn when something seemed to catch my foot and I fell face down. Laying on my stomach, I twisted to see 2 inches of rake tine protruding from my upper foot. The skin bleached around the point. Then blood oozed out around the tine. I lay there staring, waiting until a boy who was nearby pulled the rake out. He helped me as I hopped 50 yards to the hospital, where I grimaced through a series of 4 tetanus shots. The wound was bad enough that they wanted to keep me in the hospital for a while. Paul, in the bed next to me, wore a full cast on his leg to the hip. A year older than me, very thin with light hair, he had come to the state school only 2 years before. He was a freshman in high school and decades ahead of me in understanding the real world. We were both alert and began talking soon after I was in bed. "I bummed around the streets a lot when I was 13, Paul began. "That'd be 2 years ago. Then some goof got the bright idea to send me here." "Were you scared?" I asked. "Pissed off," he said, squirming to sit higher in bed. "But it ain't so bad. Here at the school, I mean, not counting this damn accident." "Remember when you got here?" "Can't remember," I said. "What about it?" "Well, the county guy bringing me here stops in this old store for cigarettes. So's I don't run off, he takes me in the store with him. When he turns his back, I hid behind shelves and snuck out the back door. But you're here, I said. Yeah, that's just it. The old coot was waiting when I came out. They're sneaky all right, I said with a half smile. What happened to your leg? Or is it your hip? Worst damn thing I ever did, Paul replied. I pumps the bicycle into that alley near the hotel, you know. I interrupted. You got a bicycle? Jeez, where you been? Paul rolled his eyes at the ceiling. Here. Maybe that's it, Paul said with a sigh. Besides, it weren't my bike. It belonged to the telegraph office. Anyway, I go lickety-split into the alley just as a pickup truck comes from the other end. I remember trying to stop, but the bumper shoved me down and... He hesitates as though the memory itself was painful. The truck runs me over. I figure I'm dying and everything goes black. Nothing. Next thing I know, I wake up under the truck, which is jacked up, and they're cutting the bike apart. Did you break your leg bad? I asked. Crushed the upper bone, Paul said. Been here 6 months already, and Doc says I'll be here more months. I limped to the cottage after 2 days, didn't have to work for a week, but was ordered to wear tennis shoes for another 2 weeks. Exploration at C-15 was limited to the cottage and playground, but at C-16, boys often went AWOL into town or for some distance along the railroad track. The C-16 staff was not inclined to notice those brief campaigns so long as boys arrived on time at work and meals. My excursions into the nearby world were a combination of excitement and fear as I inched further out into a world unknown to me, a world of cities larger than Owatonna and places I only knew about through movies. My curiosity and growing restlessness struck a chord with Dale and Chuck. We talked one day about the Waseca outing, then about problems we had with staff and bullies. Dale arrived at the state school when he was 7, shortly after his mother died, and understood far more about the world outside than me. His older sister worked in the main building and was well liked. Employees were reluctant to more than berate Dale for fear of official repercussion, but Dale was witness to many incidents of staff cruelty. Chuck seemed more afraid than Dale and complained bitterly about older bullies. We should just go, Chuck said finally. Bullies picked on him constantly. We were his only friends, and he was willing to risk it. We decided there was no time like the present to strike off on our own. It was slightly overcast, not too hot, and that which couldn't be seen or imagined beckoned stronger than hot meals or snug beds. Within moments of first discussing it, we were walking west on the tracks and didn't look back. We had no idea where to go or how to get there. This'll get us jam and maybe 3 loaves of bread, Chuck said, counting our coins that amounted to $1.15. We spent the next 2 nights and 3 days with mosquitoes and poor water. We slept on the hard ground without covers. Though Chuck got us a lawn trimming job in Waseca, Dale and he became ill, leaving me with most of the work. Nevertheless, we each got 35 cents. On the 3rd morning, we woke up on the beach, rinsed in Clear Lake, then went into a small lakefront store to buy food. Little did we know the clerk had already called the sheriff. When Chuck finished paying for our bread and jam, the door opened and 2 huge deputies entered and herded us away to the sheriff's office, where Mr. Dolman would pick us up. The store clerk kept the groceries and our money. From the records of the state school, April 1943. Miss Putter received a telephone call from Mrs. Parker, Welfare Board, Waseca, Executive Secretary, that boys apparently from the school were boarding themselves on the lake shore at Waseca. Miss Putter asked Mrs. Parker to notify the Waseca County Sheriff to pick them up and that they would be called for. Later, Worker was notified by Miss Putter, who called the sheriff's office and learned the boys had been picked up and were there. He called for them and returned them to the school. There seemed to be no object for their going except to have a good time. They had no definite destination and had gone west and south to Meridian, Heartland, Richland Center, then up to Waseca. The day following our return, I was sent to the hospital beset by diarrhea, 104 fever, and severe dehydration. Miss Plum and the doctor were concerned during the first days. Must have been the runaway, Miss Pearl suggested. The hospital staff was as pleased as me when, after 8 days, fully recovered, I returned to C-16. Back at the cottage, staff seemed to have forgotten my running away. They didn't even mind that I was still such good friends with Dale and a new boy named Billy who arrived at the school shortly after I transferred to C16. He was not my friend the way Dale was, but he had few other friends and seemed comfortable with Dale and me. His apparent adjustment to the state school was probably closer to helpless acceptance of something he really couldn't understand, like I couldn't understand the world from which he just came. Soft-spoken, often almost too whispering, he seemed to shield his deeper thoughts, and like me, he was incapable of exuberance. July turned hotter and our impatience grew, so Dale and I decided to run away again. Billy asked to join us, confiding that relatives in St. Paul might take him if we got that far. Dale and I agreed. Little of our brief excursion to Waseca made sense to me, but I realized that planning was needed were I to make it on my own. That expedition taught me a lesson that was never in any form taught at the state school: how to plan for myself. The state school fed, clothed, and sheltered us, allowing little choice of work or activities outside of free time, which was confined to specific areas. The staff always claimed, "It's for your own good." Almost every decision I tried to make for myself seemed inappropriate amid strict schedules. All three of us, each for our own reasons, began preparations on the last Monday in July to run away that Friday night after last bed check. Studying maps of Minnesota in the library, I also scanned maps of the entire country, just in case. The map seemed clear enough, but my vision of such a trip was shrouded in mist, and the more I planned, the hazier things became. Monday night, Roy and I talked briefly in the dorm, though I mentioned nothing about our trip. We were sworn to secrecy. I fell asleep thinking of the reservation in northern Minnesota, wondering how one could possibly get to a place so far away. The faint moan of a train whistle tugged me awake. While I stared at the ceiling, it blew again, closer. I rolled onto my side and cocked my head to listen. Beginning with a soft moan, the whistle reached crescendo with an eerie wail before fading mournfully. The rumbling and chugging grew louder, and the soft wheezing of venting steam drifted through the open window as the train slowed. Never quite ceasing, the rumbling was interrupted by a staccato roar as the driving wheels spun. The train accelerated north out of town, and I fell asleep thinking how, at least, we might begin our journey. An east-west track went past the cottage playground. The north-south track, the one we wanted, was farther in town. I stayed awake Tuesday night to confirm that the track did indeed go north at midnight. It did. There was magic in that forlorn sound, a call to adventure, like Jack London's Call of the Wild. Standing just inside the bedroom door, I watched the hall clock while timing the chugs. Wednesday, timing the chugs of a westbound freight past the school, I was able to guess how fast the midnight freight traveled at its slowest. We would have 10 seconds to get aboard, I reasoned, if we ran a little. Thursday morning, Dale confirmed the passage of the northbound freight the previous night. I was in constant fear that someone would discover our plan. One of the snitches would find out and turn us in, or staff might collar us at work or recreation. Dale and I slid fervently through a window of the main building food stores while Billy raided the clothing room for clean shirts and underwear. We packed everything in an old suitcase, which was stashed under the old arched wood bridge over the railroad. It seemed we had everything necessary to be on our own: a knife, flashlight, 4 cans of Spam, 2 loaves of bread, 2 bottles of jam, and clean clothes. Knowing about farm chores, lawn work, and house cleaning, we hoped such work would get us started. The weather began to warm Wednesday, and by Friday, Owatonna sweltered in 95-degree heat, which dropped little after dark. The heat was stifling in the C16 dorms. Boys slept atop covers in their briefs. I was wet as if I had just stepped from the shower. Though tired, I was too nervous to fall asleep and lay counting down the hours. Long branches of the cottonwood trees nearly brushed our dorm windows. Other nights, I had stared at the branches flickering hypnotically in the streetlight glow, their rustle and sway often lulling me to sleep. That night, however, no breeze moved through the open windows or sighed among the branches. Miss Klein's bed check itinerary never varied, nor did her quiet shoes normally awaken us. She began the last bed check in Dale's dorm, went through ours, finally returning to her room for the night. Later, near the exterior door, we each wore denims, a t-shirt, and low-cut tennis shoes without socks. To prevent suspicion, we had kept only everyday clothes by our beds, storing all other clothes in the suitcase. We slipped into the shadow of the cottage created by the streetlight. Dale led the way into the bushes, but Billy stood stunned. I nudged him, questioning the wisdom of having him along, but we moved silently through the bushes and across the field. From the darkness near the bridge, I stared at the cottage silhouetted by streetlights. Delirious with anticipation, needing to get out of town, I paused but a moment. No one had found the suitcase. Since we needed nothing in the case that night, we simply grabbed it and headed east on the track, carrying it by turns. In town, we scrambled down a bank, which was raised for the viaduct of the north-south track, and made our way to bushes north of the depot. A streetlight dimly flittered through the bushes, and we tried to relax around a blackened circle of stones used by hobos. No sooner were we settled than a distant murmur was heard above the sounds of nighttime Owatonna. "Must be it," Dale said as the sound became distant. We left the bushes, stood beside the track, waiting. The train rounded the bend. Its glaring headlight outlined my friends. Suddenly its whistle moaned, grew to a banshee shriek, then faded to a low wail, sounding much as it had from the dorm, only louder, terrifying. Hissing steam and rumbling were beyond anything imagined from C-16. I suddenly felt very small. "The freight slows to snatch a mailbag or something," Billy had said. I held the suitcase, a remnant, perhaps, of an earlier arrival at the school. It was heavy, bulging, but wrapped with cord. It seemed it would hold. Suddenly, bellowing, still 50 yards away, the engine spun in place. Its drivers caught, and it charged toward us with steady, powerful throbs. Leaning out as he passed, the engineer surprised me, considering our age and the hour of the night, by waving to us. Nevertheless, I aligned my eyes with his and waved back, quickly glancing aside. It was next to impossible for me to more than glance into an adult's face, especially staff, like searching for misery. The engine disappeared into the tunnel. The powerful blasts, as it passes us, became dull chugs from the other side of the viaduct. Cars rumbled past, accelerating ominously faster than I had anticipated. The wind from the train fluffed our t-shirts and tossed our hair as we leaned near to see what cars came past the depot. Half the train passed, still no open boxcars. A flat car came past the depot, maybe our only chance. "Quick, Billy, the flat car!" I shouted. "The ladder on the end!" Billy jumped, but hesitated to reach for the car only yards away. Dale, running alongside, brushed past him, grabbing the rung at the rear of the car, and swung easily, as though it wasn't the first time, onto the car. He reached down and helped Billy climb on. Crawling to the center of the car, Billy lay flat. It was hard running alongside the car, holding the ladder rung, and my gait was hampered by the heavy case. In desperation, I pulled myself toward the flat car and swung the case while thrusting with my grounded foot. The bottom of the case erupted. 3 of everything, food, flashlight, knife, and all were strewn along the tracks. My stride failed when the case emptied. With one foot on the rung and other in space, I released the case and clung precariously as we gained speed. For a moment, I thought to leap off before I fell, but Dale reached down, grabbed my belt, and rolled me onto the deck, holding me until I caught my balance. We went through the tunnel and out the other side.